Evangelism.com. We are so glad that you have stumbled upon this broadcast here this afternoon. Just to set the stage of what is the backstage, well, it's a time where we just take a pause out of our day to kind of realign, reorient, and just kind of hit pause on the chaos and the noise of the day and of the moment, and really kind of discuss some stuff that matters. And that's the backstage realities of our lives. We here at ResilientChurchLeadership.com and this entire project just have a firm belief that it's healthy leaders that lead healthy churches, and it's healthy churches that will change the fabric of our community. So we've taken some time not to give leadership principles, not to solve all of the problem, but to focus on character, resiliency, and all things in our backstage lives. So today we are talking about decision fatigue, and I am joined by three good friends of mine, Dr. Margaret Diddams, I'm Mindy Calaguire, and the one and only Jimmy Dodd. And these are friends that are frequent guests here on our podcast and on our webinar. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in with decision fatigue. And Jimmy, maybe I'll start with you, and just to say, I know that I've experienced a lot of decision fatigue during these last 6 months, but I lead a city network here in South Florida called Church United that's got tons of churches that work together. And as part of that role, I get to hear from a lot of church staffs. And one of the things that I've heard is, listen, my senior leader is making decision after decision after decision, and he's changing his mind all of the time. So we're putting in a ton of work on this project or a ton of work on this idea, and the next day, everything changes. Are you hearing that? Because I know that you interact with a lot of pastors around the country. Mindy, the same thing. Can you just give your perspective as someone that works with leaders day in and day out on how should we be thinking about this? Are our church staffs crazy?
Yeah, this time is absolutely unprecedented because we have to shift constantly. And so we make a big decision, and then it might change actually that next day. And this is the ultimate time to be very adaptive in the way you lead, because you have to just adapt every day, because things change day by day. Sometimes they change actually hour by hour. And so, yeah, there have been so many times which you just have to stop and just, change and pivot, that can wear on you. That can really wear on you. And it becomes very weary for a staff if they don't have a chance to actually say, hey, I've already done a lot of work in this area, and I know that we just made a shift, but I'm way down the road over here. And so I guess that everything I've done, it just can't be used. And that's been very hard for lots of staffs. And so it's very interesting, because I think you kind of have to, I just think you have to draw some lines between a lead pastor and then staff. And oftentimes I talk to lead pastors that are convinced that they have their whole team involved in all of these big decisions. And then you speak with the staff, and they can have a very different view and say, no, I'm not involved in these decisions because I don't feel like I can take the risk to push back, because to push back against my pastor, there's a risk in that, and I don't want to lose my job. And I think if I push back enough, I think that they might say, oh, we don't really need you, especially if you're an older pastor. It's just a frightening time to push back right now and to say, hey, I don't agree with these decisions, or I'm just not on board. Because if you're like in your 50s and 60s, you're thinking, man, every church out there wants young pastors in their 30s, and I don't know if I could find another job right now, so I can't risk it. And it's a shame, because oftentimes you have so much wisdom on the staff that's not being tapped into, because they have the fear of, I can't take a risk to share the way that I feel, because I have a lead pastor that is making all of these decisions. And if I push back, I don't know if they're going to want to hear that pushback.
Let's just park it on a comment that you just shared right there, because that's something that I've also heard is a lot of senior leaders, a lot of lead pastors, executive directors of ministries and organizations feel like it all depends on them in this moment, that it's all like these decisions, like everyone is looking to me, I can't make the wrong decisions. And I think whether intentionally or unintentionally, and I'll probably argue that 9 times out of 10, it's unintentionally, we're alienating and we're silencing those on our downline teams, because we're like, no, they're all looking to me. And the reality is, like, God has given us a team and a cacophony of voices that we can lean on during this time. Mindy, how how would you interact with that? I would just love, like, what is
Yeah.
in your what's in your head right now as you're hearing us process
Yeah,
this?
the minute I heard that was our topic and that we were discussing this in a planning context, I was like, I need whatever we're about to talk about. I want to learn from you guys. I have felt there. I remember it was about 2 weeks ago on a Monday morning, maybe midway through the morning, and full of meetings and all that kind of stuff. And I felt like I had this like brain fog, which I don't generally have, right? I'm usually pretty like quick thinking and all those things. And I just was like, what is it again? What am I working on? Like, it was very unfocused and unfamiliar for me. And like, almost like I didn't know myself. Like, who are you? What are you doing? And thankfully, I'm not feeling that way exactly in this moment, but I have felt that way increasingly. And I would say, Jimmy, the dynamics you're talking about, where like a team comes in and now it's, student body left, student body right, we're going this way. No, actually, we need to go this way. Is also what I have experienced in my like marketplace role and Glue and all the churches we deal with here. It's like we have a constant set of new decisions that are being made all the time based on new input coming in, new information, new realities, new metrics, new polls, new everything. And there's just a constant recalibration to what's important now. And I don't think there's any other way right now. I don't know that it's wrong, but it can be exhausting. And so that's for me anyway, Eddie, when I think about where I'm at in the middle of this, it's really like, that's my reality. The team I lead is looking to me. Yeah. And I sat in this very room with a team yesterday afternoon, and I'm the leader, right? And I'm thinking, I should be like setting the goals and saying this is where we're heading. And in a way, it was like, all right, guys, here we are. We got to figure out how to respond to this new thing. What do you think? It was like, I did not feel like some strong, decisive, informed leader. And, to your point about the people who are on your teams, it's like this awesome, like, whiteboard emerged with great ideas and good questions. And I hope that where we're headed is going to be effective and helpful, but it's just a different headspace for me. It feels a little different.
So, Dr. Diddams, if I could ask, could you put on your psychologist hat and tell us what's wrong with all of us? Because as Mindy's talking, like, I so resonate with just the fog and the cloudiness that we so often have felt in this season. I'm sure that's normal.
Right. So greetings, everyone, from Chicago's beautiful Union Station. You'll see a train picture behind me and people walking behind me. My husband and I are about to do a 36-hour train ride. So I'm greetings from the station. And if there's an announcement, I'm going to mute. And Eddie, you go on to someone else. But here's what's happening. Decision fatigue is a real thing that has been studied for about the last 10 years. Decision making wears people out. So a couple things I want you to think about in the decision making. There's two types of decisions. There's the main decision, and then like we're going to do something, and then there's a how we're going to do it. So I like to think of this as a tree, the trunk, and then the branches off. So think about when you decided to get married. Yes, no. But then you had to plan the wedding, and all of a sudden you're making hundreds of decisions. Or you're buy a house, yes, no. And then you're remodeling the kitchen, thousands of decisions. Or guys, you decide to buy a car, yes, no. And then what package are you going to buy? It's that second part. It's not the main decision. It's the one with all the options that wears people out. And when I tell you it wears people out, you are physically drained by all those options.
Wow.
So if you are feeling tired, you should be feeling tired, because one of the issues that we're dealing with right now is limited information. And so those option trees, we're getting more information every day, and so we're having to make more optional decisions, and that's what's wearing people out. If that makes sense, because information is coming in constantly. We're not being able to make decisions all at once. And so, yes, you are all tired because we're all tired because our decision making is work. Mm-hmm. Work takes energy, and we are working with limited energy and too many options right now. So this is all legit. Decision fatigue is a legitimate thing, and there's reasons why you are all feeling tired.
So I am crazy, but I'm not crazy at the same time, if I heard you correctly.
You're tired, Eddie. You're not crazy. You're tired.
That's good. No, I'll take that. I'll take that. My wife will probably tell you I'm both, but that's for a whole other webinar where we can diagnose Eddie.
Well, and it seems to me, if I could just hop in there, Margaret, based on what you're saying, and I love hearing that there's like biological truth to what it feels like right now. That's actually encouraging. But it feels to me like this sort of COVID moment we're in, and then the political issues going on, and all the different high voltage issues that are appropriately gaining our attention in many places, but still are, there's new news coming in, there's new information. And unlike maybe purchasing a car or remodeling a kitchen, it's like you're trying to remodel a kitchen, but every day the dimensions of it are changing, and every day the direction, is it facing south or facing west, is changing. And it's like the amount of information that we're trying to absorb in the midst of that, like the tree thing. It's like the staircases at Harry Potter's Hogwarts. Hopefully that's not a bad thing on this call, but everything just keeps
you heathen
moving.
Harry Potter reader.
I know.
Burned all those in my household. I can't believe
Confession. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like there's a moment, like maybe decision fatigue is a real thing, probably for pastors and leaders and any leader on any given day. But the multiplier effect of what we're dealing with right now feels next level.
Yeah, and can we just talk? Go ahead, please.
So I just want to say a couple things around that. What happens with decision making in organizations is that people make that main decision without thinking about the implementation decisions. And good decision making takes into consideration both. You never make that main decision until you've talked through what are the implementation decisions. So one of the things is you don't want to get ahead of yourself in, we're going to do this, but we don't know how, right? This is the old fire, ready, aim sort of thing. So in a sense, what the research has shown is that if you slow down decision making, you actually speed it up, if that makes sense. If you incorporate both the main decision making and the options as much as possible, then you actually get to implementation faster, which I think is fascinating.
I think that's super fascinating. And that starts to raise up like soul level issues, because what would cause me to try to push to a decision prematurely when I hadn't taken the slower path to get to a better choice? And that just makes me think of, at least in my own life, the insecurities or a variety of things that if my soul is a little bit on tilt to begin with, and I'm pressed with a decision that needs to be made, and I might drive to a decision, even telling myself that that's good leadership. I'm being strong, I'm being firm, I'm being urgent, that it in fact could be driven by things that are very unhealthy.
Mindy, I think you're spot on.
So on.
And I think in a moment of just transparency here, since we are talking about the backstage, if I really kind of press rewind and look at just some of the ways that I've processed key important decisions in my life and in the organization that I lead, a lot of that just stems from this performance driven, deep rootedness. Like, I have to get this right? Like, if I get this wrong, it's all going to fall apart. It's all going to be on me. And it has just been a quiet, unintentional, just rejection of grace, rejection and the freedom. Just like, I have the ability and the freedom to fail. Like, I am not going to get every decision right. And leader, if you're listening to this, pastor, if you're listening to this, like, you are going to fail at some of these decisions. There's just no way you're going to get every decision right, because we've not been here before. So if you hear one thing from this whole time today, is you do have the freedom to fail. Like, you do have the freedom to not get every decision right, and just relax and know that like there is grace for those moments.
That's
Jimmy.
that's very, very
Yeah.
strong. I have talked to more and more pastors who have said that they've gotten some of the worst emails of their life in the past 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
some mean, harsh emails. And the thing you have to know is for every issue, you've got two extremes. You always have two, like extreme groups. So the pastor say that he sleeps around, and you have the group that says, fire him, and there's no severance, and there's no nothing, and he should never get anything. And then you have this group over here that says, well, now he can just be a lot more like us, and he can understand our pains and our temptations. I mean, there's always two, the mask or the no mask. Those groups on the fringes are always vocal, always. They're loud, and they're screaming at you. And so if you make decisions based upon the volume of those who are like, you've got to do it this way, you have to do it this way. Listen, there's a huge group in the middle. I mean, look, oftentimes about 90%. You've got to think about that group as you make the decisions.
So good.
You've got to think about the group that is not being vocal, but that's the vast majority of your church. They're not going to speak up.
Wow.
But there's always the loud voices on those extremes. Don't let them dictate what you do. Do not let antagonists set the agenda for what God has called you to do.
Ooh.
I believe you have a Bible reference for just that analogy.
What's that now?
So you've often shared, it's not coming to mind. It's when Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall.
Oh yes. Yeah, yes, exactly. There's a great verse in Nehemiah 3.
I'm having
5.
the same. I was trying to like actually put it from memory.
But there, there is that, that there's that verse that says that there's a big group that works hard, and then it says that there's a small part of their group, and they just don't want to work. And I love the fact that that next verse says, and then the next part of the wall was done by this group, and then it just goes on. It does not say
the agenda does
so they
not
stopped the work. They stopped the work because there was one group, and it's like, listen, we've got about 60 teams here who are excited to work. We've got one small group that says we don't want to do this work on the wall. I love the fact that group did not set the agenda. It was almost like, you guys can scream and yell and moan. You're not going to dictate what we do here. And so he just goes on in the story. So I love the fact that we stopped and we formed special committees, and we formed a task force to hear what they're concerned. I love the fact that it's like, you know what, you're just a very small fraction. And there's always that negative group. Every church has got that small fraction. They're always negative. They hate everything.
There is no way you're pleasing everybody in this season.
Don't make decisions based upon those fringe groups.
So, Margaret, as Jimmy was talking, I saw you get fired up. So I want you to chime in here. There was something in your head and on your heart. But before you do that, friends, if you're listening, if you're here live on Facebook or on Zoom, and you have a question, or maybe you want one of our panelists here to expand on something they've shared, please chime in the comment section, in the Q&A. We want to hear from you. This is much of a dialogue as it is a presentation of content and a conversation. So please, we want to hear what questions do you have. Put them in the chat, and we will address them live here. But Margaret, I'm just curious. I saw you going, yes,
jump in.
as Jimmy was talking. Jump in.
There was an announcement going on here in Union Station. It's like, okay, good. So here's a couple things that you think about. Those kind of emails that you get, they actually introduce options, right? Because of I need to respond to what someone is telling me to do, as if that's another choice. And so focusing on vision, values, what we're about centering, allows us to go back to folks and say, you know what, that's not who we are about. So you take it out of the interpersonal, and you're able to say, this is who we are as an institution, and you get out of that urgency versus important aspect, and just being reinforcing that, because in a sense, those kind of emails, I love the Nehemiah, it's creating noise, and noise is just more more options around that. Also, that part of the conversation we were talking about earlier about giving permission to fail and right or wrong decisions. One of the things we talk about in business, I'm just going to shift, is the idea of wicked problems. And wicked problems are when you have to make a decision where you simply don't have all the information. And so we shift from making right or wrong decisions to making good decisions. So I'm going to stop talking now and let you guys talk about good versus real decisions.
I literally quoted you, Margaret, because you used that that sort of construct of those differences when we were talking, I think it was last week. And it's a very helpful understanding, if I can try to step into Margaret's shoes and explain, but and she'll correct me. But that basic idea here is that I quoted you on just this morning is we feel pressure / desire / spiritual obligation to make right decisions, right? Like we want to do that. And that's a good thing that we want to make a right decision. We want to serve our people well. But the pressure to make a right decision with incomplete information or constantly changing information it presents like almost an impossible scenario. You cannot make a right decision because you simply do not have the information, and it's possible it will change tomorrow. And in contrast to putting the weight on ourselves of trying to make a right decision, a better way to think about what's in front of us right now is to the courage and the challenge to say, can I make a good decision? Can I make one that's good for what I know right now and may change? And that's fine. It's sort of presumed we can make a good enough decision for right now. And I don't know, maybe different personality types would have a harder time with that than others. But for me, it's an extremely helpful alternative way to think about what I was trying to do. Like, I need to make a decision, take off the pressure of making a right decision, but allow yourself the freedom to consider what would be a good decision. Did I fairly represent it? You can just nod.
And here's why it's important to think in terms of a good decision is if you think in good, you can then make better decisions as you get more information and input. But if you frame it as right or wrong, then you get a defensiveness, as if because I'm changing my mind, I must have made a wrong decision. And we need to move away from right now in crisis management. You can't really think in terms of right or wrong decisions. It has to be good and better decisions.
So good.
That's gold,
good.
Right?
So Jimmy, I'm actually going to jump to you. There was a question that just came in. And I know that you deal with a lot of church conflicts, you do work with peacemakers. And the question here is, how do you balance taking time to try to get people's opinions and get the team unified and just deciding and moving ahead? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, this might sound like a very, very just real basic answer. Ask your team. Just ask your team, hey, do you guys, and I say guys because I'm in Kansas, which means men and also women. So hey guys, you know what? Do you feel free to like actually engage in this? Do you feel free to actually push back on this? And just ask them, because I think that you might be shocked as a lead pastor to hear, we really don't feel free to push back against you. We really don't feel free. So I would say just I mean, like as just a really just a basic place to start, just ask that question. Do you feel free to actually engage in this time, or do you feel like, no, this is your call and we feel like, you know what, you have to make the call, and whatever you do, we just have to kind of march behind you? Just ask that question, because I think that most pastors think, no, it's very much a team and we're all engaged in this and involved. And then you talk with the team and they say, not so much. So I would say just start off, ask that basic question. And that's just a great place to start.
Good. That's good. So Dr. Diddams, if I can, I know that you have spoken a little bit on, there are actually some practical ways that we can minimize decision fatigue in our lives, things like diet, rootedness, routine. Could you just share just a little bit of that from your perspective?
Yes, if before they make another announcement about the train going to Texas.
It just proves you're really the train station, which we love that. This is such real life. I'm kind of excited. I kind of want to know where
we're all on this journey with you. So you know what? Just press through the announcement.
So a couple things about this decision fatigue and things we can do. And I talked about minimizing options. This sounds so dopey, but bear with me. You need to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. A lot of times, I mean, we're all going crazy and we're skipping lunches. Actually, what the research shows is people actually make better decisions in the morning than they do in the afternoon, because people are just, think of it, you're tired. And so you want to make sure that you're eating, silly as that sounds, make sure that you're eating right. The other thing you want to do is have your team meetings in the morning. Again, because you're fresh and you're being able to have that energy to do more complex decision making. Then another thing, and this goes to what you were talking about, Jimmy, is do not assume that silence equals consent.
Good.
You really need, a leader needs to go around the table and ask for everyone's opinion, not whether or not they agree. And this is that issue with options. You want to be getting those fresh perspectives. So don't ask people if they agree. Ask them their opinion first, so that you're getting that.
Good.
The other thing I want to encourage all church organizations and pastors, make sure you're starting with devotions. Make sure that you're giving it to the Lord, and that you're focused on the Lord's goodness. And from a psychological perspective, the more that you can focus on meaning and gratitude, you actually make better decisions around that. And then this is kind of a duh moment, kind of with that eating. Try not to schedule back to back to back meetings. We all talk about the Zoom fatigue. And at least when we were meeting face to face, you got a bathroom break or something. But how many of us are going from one link to another link to another link? It's just not leading to good decision making. You know that it falls off by the afternoon. You really need to schedule in some brain time, as it were. Then the other thing that's interesting about, I know I'm lecturing, blah, blah, blah.
No, this
but
is good.
One of the things with fatigue, believe it or not, is it doesn't always come out as being tired. It often can be that people are intense and ramped up. And so fatigue can come out as prickly and tense. It's not just a falling back. So you really need to make sure that you have that social support. All right, you guys talk now.
No, it's Mindy, I would love to hear from you on, you mentioned something early on that this has to do with soul health, right? And if I'm listening between the lines, and one of the things that Margaret just shared is a rootedness that we need in our lives. When we talk about starting our morning with devotion, that's just not like, hey, let me just get into my routine and do this. It's literally rooting ourselves, reminding ourselves of who we are. What is it that God has called us to? What are we busy chasing after? Remembering our why, to quote our friend Simon Sinek. But would you just speak from a soul health perspective, as you've done a ton of spiritual direction and care in your life? Why does that lead to better decisions, to better leadership?
Yeah, I think that actually I've heard two things on this call so far that I like immediately hear it, and I'm like, okay, those are soul level issues that are going to show up in our leadership. And so the first was that one that we might too quickly want to push to a decision and make a fast decision rather than a slower one that would consider all the implementation considerations rather than just the binary yes, no, do we go in that direction? And what in my soul would cause me to push so hard? You brought up, Eddie, the performance standards, or any number of things that might, even just fierce self-reliance and the ego and those kinds of things. But the other one you mentioned, Margaret, is the defensiveness, that when we feel like we have a right decision and we can't consider it was just a good one and what's a better one, we have to defend and lock in, and almost to an irrational point, just start like defending something because it was our first decision. those are very clearly can be driven by very deep soul level stuff. And when I think about the challenge to start our days with that devotion, the spiritual practice that's like coming to mind immediately around that in terms of for me and how I try to start my days most often, it's around having, and I think it's important for leaders, a daily prayer of surrender. A daily time when at the beginning of the day, or whenever in the day I remember, could be like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or when I'm driving home or falling asleep at night, if that's the first time I remember, but at the first time in the day that I remember, it almost in a really kind of making a transactional relationship with God here, not to be weird, but like, let's reground on reality. You are God, I am not. I am serving what I understand you to be calling me to do as best I know how. And I want to re-surrender again this day, my gifting, my energies, my wounds, my talents, my gifts, whatever I have to give back into your good care for your God's direction, yours to guide and lead and direct or redirect me however you deem. And I think for leaders, it's so important for us to reground, and we're fundamentally led. We are leaders who are followers, and our leadership emerges out of our followership, and to remind ourselves and God to get clear on that on a daily basis. There have been different ways I do that throughout the years. There's sometimes I sort of pause and pray through the 23rd Psalm, and there was one particular passage within that is the you lead me, God, you lead me on paths of righteousness for your name's sake, right? He leads us on paths. He leads me on right paths, says it in different ways. What does it mean to pray for this day by way of surrender? God, I'm looking for you to lead me on a path of righteousness, a better path, a better decision, a right path. For your name's sake, not for my organization's namesake, not for my namesake, not for the being right namesake, but for his namesake. So that's one expression is the 23rd Psalm. Sometimes I've used the Lord's Prayer and just the yieldedness and surrender that we find in the words of that, your kingdom come, your will be done. And then the other one was a prayer that was given to me years ago. I can't remember if I've ever talked about that on these weekly conversations that we've had, but it's in a little plaque that I keep on my desk and have for like a very long time. It was given to me when I was first engaged to be married, and to this day I still do not know who the original author was. I have some wonderings, but the prayer starts out, Lord, I'm your servant. Jesus, I'm your servant. Take me, take all of me, add anything, take anything away, with any cost, at any price. Make me yours completely and wholly. And it goes on, not wholly but like totally. And it goes on from there, but it is as absolute of surrender as I've ever encountered in the form of a prayer. And it has been my practice for many, many years. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. You feel like you're sort of choking through that. Like, add anything, take anything away, with any cost, at any price. Make me yours completely. Totally.
So good.
That's rich.
And those daily prayers of surrender, I think, help me just once again be a daughter of our God. Remind me of my identity, that I am well in God's good care, that I lead out of his leadership, out of God's leadership. And my biggest goal then is to reorient as often as I can toward receiving God's guidance toward me personally and towards the things I'm stewarding. Anyway, I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that was very helpful. And as I'm listening to you talk too, one of the things that always comes to mind every time I read an ancient prayer or you hear one of these heroes of the faith kind of share what's on their heart the way you've just done it, they had such an understanding that it's not about them at the end of the day, right? There was that surrender that this is about what the Lord has called me to. This is about God's kingdom, not about my kingdom. And so much decision fatigue, at least that I've seen here, and even experienced in my own life, is I tend to make the decision about me and about how am I going to look, how's the organization I lead going to look, rather than, you know what, it's not about me. And when we can reorient ourselves to that, the freedom that comes from that, and even freedom to risk a little more. I've seen a lot of safe decisions during this time, right? I've seen churches press the brake pedal rather than the accelerator. And I think this is such a time to press the accelerator as God's people. Our lost friends, neighbors, coworkers in cities, they're yearning for God in this moment. And yet so much of what we're doing is safe, and let's just keep what we have going rather than, God, if it's not about me and it's about your kingdom, like, let's go. Jimmy, I know that you shared a lot about risk and staff risk really in churches and how that's perceived now. I'd love to just hear what's on your heart about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned it at the very start, but the one group that just I feel very, very burdened for is I meet lots of older staff that have so much wisdom, so much experience, and they just have so much to offer. And oftentimes they just kind of say, I have to stay on the bench in one sense, because if I engage and I'm wrong, that means that I might fail. And if I fail, that means I might lose my job. And if I lose my job, I think I'm done, because nobody wants anybody my age. So I think if you're a lead pastor, if you have older staff members, you have to very, very intentionally go to them and say, do not stop taking risks. Just because you're older, don't stop taking risks, because the best work is done by far when we take a risk. I mean, there's always a risk, that you might fail. You have a new idea, you have a new program, you have this and that. It might fail. And I've just seen so many gifts get parked and they're not used by people. And it breaks my heart. I would also say, when you look for staff, don't just say staff have to be like that they have to be born after 1995 or whatever. It's like, come on. I mean, there are some really wise older people that can just bring so much. And yet I just don't think that we actually listen to them. But it just breaks my heart to see a lot of wisdom that just goes untapped because of that risk, that fear of the risk. And I think we have to be very, very intentional. Don't just assume, well, they're older, but they know that they can take something. No, they don't know that, because I talk with a lot. Don't just assume that. You have to be very intentional. Go to them and say, listen, we need you to be your best. And for you to be your best, you need to keep taking risks.
So, Margaret, I'd love for you to share, psychologically, we all handle this idea of risk differently, right? There's some of us that can tolerate it. There's some of us that just really get a ton of anxiety when we hear, what do you mean you want me to take a risk? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Our church is barely holding on and you're wanting me to take risk? Like, what? I'd love to just, you could share some wisdom on how that lands, how that fuels the difference of opinions and really kind of creates a cohesiveness in our teams.
Yeah. So what I'd like to talk to people about when you're making decisions, are you an engineer that you're building a bridge and something cannot be undone? Or are you making decisions in a way that you can pivot from them? And I think having people understand that you're making decisions that can be pivot. It's not like you're going to build a bridge and it's going to collapse. So the depth of the becomes important. And I'm going to let someone else talk for a second.
And Mindy, you're up. I need you to channel your best Margaret Diddams right now.
I've tried, but please, I do not have one or more PhDs. I do not have all those things. So I probably can't do that. But I do know that this has been a helpful conversation for me because it feels very real and practical.
Yeah, I would just love to know from our audience too, like how's this landing, right? Like, please chime in the comments, put it in the Q&A here. I would love to know, like, how are you experiencing decision making during this season? But as you
So,
do that,
Eddie,
Dr. Diddams, please, yeah.
I want to say one more thing because they're done. The California Zephyr announcement is done. Is to go back to that emptying yourself. One of the interesting things about decision making and fatigue is that oftentimes when we make decisions, we see as if we're making decisions that reflect ourselves or are about us. And when we, does that make sense? So
Yeah.
if I make a decision, it's reflecting on me. And so I love the idea of the importance of emptying ourselves of that ego. And related to that is making sure that we have an accountability group that is outside of the impact of our decisions. Because we want to make sure, because it's easier to make decisions about other people than it is about ourselves because of the ego involvement. And so if we have those confidants that are outside of our decision-making realm, they can actually help us make better decisions. So it's really important to have that social support outside of one's organization.
That's great.
I want to jump in on that. And that's, again, we've talked about friendship and the importance of friendship on this environment before, and how difficult it can sometimes be for us in ministry leadership. But I had something happen, Margaret. Maybe you can sort of, as Eddie said, diagnose me or see if this relates to what you were just saying.
I'd bill her, Margaret. She's on the clock.
Yeah, right? I know. Send me a bill. It's good. I had a situation happen yesterday where I encountered a decision or a problem scenario that requires some action. And it was like in an instant, it was very clear to me the strategic path, what the implications would be, where we could go, and just sort of gently suggested, maybe we look at this, maybe we look at that. And the people involved were like, yeah, that'd be helpful. Maybe we could try that. It was helpful. Okay. Flip it to a situation I am very personally involved with that I feel immobilized in being able to understand a right path forward on some of the specifics of it. All right. And I was on the phone with a friend last night, and she had the exact clarity of insight that you're describing and that I encounter when I'm less involved in the actual decision itself. There's actual brain science behind that.
Yes, there is brain science. Well, social psychology that.
But we're going to call it brain science from here on out.
Okay,
That's a great term.
That's fine.
That's a great term.
But yeah, we do better at making decisions. There's less layers of complexity when the decision is not something that we're going to see as a decision about our own ego or self. So it's freeing to bring people in who don't have a stake as it is, and bounce ideas off of them, because they're coming at it from a different perspective than when we're ego filled about it.
That's so valuable. I mean,
no,
it
that's
resonates with
so
how life
good.
works, but what a good.
Yeah, I do want to also say when you're getting this worn out bit, the prickliness and the tenseness, it's not like you wake up one morning and that all of a sudden occurs. Think about the people you're working with right now. It's kind of a slow burn. And so people aren't seeing that prickliness or that tenseness in themselves probably as soon as they should. And that's why that external social support, having those people who can say, my dear brother, sister, I want to reflect back on what I'm seeing for you, kind of the unhealthiness. Who are those people in your lives that you can turn to in that ego defenseless way and say, tell me how I am landing on others, because we cannot see it in ourselves, especially when we're in this fatigue state.
So let's just talk for a moment, because not only does that so deeply resonate, but I think we've seen pastors and ministry leaders in this season move into deeper and deeper and deeper isolation rather than collaboration, right? And if there's one thing we've seen here in our context in South Florida and city movements, is when pastors come together in unity and collaborate on decisions, process with one another, make, if I could say this way, capital C church decisions together, a lot of that weight kind of comes off of them because they're doing this together rather than just as one unit. So when you put aside your ego and your logo, you can do a whole lot of good for the kingdom. And it's better for everybody. But anyway, please share it.
Yeah. Yeah, I when I was at Wheaton, our internal counsel, he wasn't part of academic affairs. I was always turning to him, um, not so much for legal advice, but I wanted to get his point of view because he was totally out of my organization, but he's a really smart guy. And so who are those people that you're leaning on who can help you see things that you can't see yourself? And also, Eddie, that's kind of that better together,
Yeah.
right? I'm looking at some of the chat that we're getting on the side. And again, I want to emphasize that when you can bring people together to help trim the options and then help with thinking through them before you kind of make that big decision, it's just less fatiguing.
Yeah.
It's really good. I love
Jimmy,
that.
can you speak to some of the isolation? I know not only you've written about that, you and I were just recently talking about just the isolation that we're seeing from pastors around the country right now. And now is not a time for isolation at all.
Yeah.
Isolation is dangerous right now.
Oh,
It always has been, but it's very dangerous in these moments.
sin thrives in isolation. Sin loves isolation. And I think that that's the main tool, I believe, of Satan, is that he wants us to be very, very isolated. And oftentimes it's fear. It's, I don't want to be, that I don't want to share my life with you, because I think if I shared my life with you and my struggles and the fact that I can't make decisions, I think that you might think less of me, which is so often, just a big lie. It's the whole, if you really, really knew me, I don't think that you'd actually like me. And so we just keep all of our secrets, and we keep things very deep inside. And yet we need those friends to share things with and our secrets, because if you share things with even just one person, so much of the weight comes off of our back.
Yeah.
If we talk to even one person and just say, you know what, I don't know what to do right now. And it's freeing. But we have just convinced ourselves that'll make me look like I'm not a strong leader. So I think that I should isolate. I think I should make all of these all these big decisions in a vacuum, in a sense. And that's the worst possible thing. We have to have each other. We were created for community, and we need that. We need to have those friends that can speak into our life and say, hey, I don't think that this is a good thing, or hey, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm starting to see some real defensiveness in you, and just to be just like extremely controlling. We've got have to.
So before we go around, as we wrap up our time here, and we get the final word, for final idea from each of you, Jimmy, you actually have a practical exercise that you want to take us through before we get to our final word. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss it to you and take us through that, brother.
Yeah. So I would say that we just have to realize that in the midst of these big decisions, we've got to have some real perspective. And I think that there's times in which we just have to zoom way out and just understand there is a grace about decision making. And the grace is this: if you make decisions, it means very, very basically, you have choice. And if you have choice, you're rich, because the vast majority of the world does not have choice. You make thousands of decisions every day. You make hundreds of thousands of decisions every day, and you don't even think about it. Like, you stop off at a grocery store, that's 100,000 decisions right there. Which, brand of toothpaste, which there might be 60, or what, this or that, that you face choice every day as far as which shirt do I wear, or which dress do I wear, or which pair of socks do I wear, which like, if you stop off at Starbucks, that's 60,000 choices right there, right? You can just get, there's so many options. We have so many choices, and you get to church and you have decisions about going live, or do we do this, or do we go back to church, or do we not doing mask or not? All these big decisions. The vast majority of the world does not have choice. There are so many pastors around the world that they do not have choice. They wear the same thing every day. They eat rice and beans every day for every meal. And on Friday, they hope that they have rice and beans and like maybe small amount of protein. For many of them, it's just like a fish powder. They don't have choice. So it's one of those things I would just ask you to just close your eyes here for just a minute. And let me just thank God that we have choices, that we've been so blessed in this country, in this time, that we have choice, and that we would remember our brothers and sisters around the world that do not have choice. God, we just pray right now for those who labor, Lord, in parts of Africa and South America and Latin America. And Lord, there are so many places around the world where there is no choice. And I know pastors that would long to have decisions and they would love to have choice. But Father, we realize that the reason why we have to make decisions is because we've been blessed. And so, Father, before we just get angry about decisions, may we just take that deep breath and say, Lord, thank you that I have these choices to make. I've been so richly blessed that we can even make these decisions. And so, Father, we just want to be more aware of the blessings that we have, and the fact that choice is one sign that we are just wealthy, because we have so much more than the vast majority of the world. So God, before we just get angry about decisions, may we be grateful, and may we just say thank you to you for the abundance of decisions that we have, which is just a picture of your kindness and your overflowing generosity towards us. So God, make us more grateful that we would see the grace of choices just a bit more clearly each and every day. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Jimmy, thanks for that. That was very reorienting to our realities and just how blessed we each are to have those choices to make. Thank you. All right. So friends, as we have 8 minutes together left here, I'd love to just go around and as we talk about decision fatigue, as we look at some practical solutions, as we've all been vulnerable to share how we just feel about this moment, the fog that we're in, all the decisions that we're making, what is just some final word of advice? What's a final idea or thought that you would just have on this topic? And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Diddams. So final word.
What I'd like to say is I hope that everyone is doing some sort of retreat this fall with their staff. This is really a time for vision setting, working from the same values, making sure everyone is working off the same page, because I'm concerned that the number of options as it is and the disagreements is maybe not everyone is working off the same vision of, especially where we're going for the fall. So I do hope everyone has a fall retreat scheduled. And I also want to say, not only for your team, but for yourself, everyone needs to get some time away and be with the Lord in the next month or so.
Those are
Thank
good
you.
words.
It's
Thanks,
good.
Mark.
Mindy.
Yeah, my final word on the topic of decision fatigue is influenced by an article that some friends shared this past week that came from Tom Rainer, I believe, who wrote, and maybe some of you are familiar with this, about a very poignant thing on Monday about the 6 reasons your pastor is about to quit. And it was very achy, and a lot of the fatigue that we're talking about today, I think underlies some of the reasons Tom is citing for that, based on his and his organization's conversations with many leaders. And so, and many on this call, you may be in that seat. You may be about to quit, and you probably aren't quitting ministry, but you're maybe going to quit a job. And I think based on our conversation today, first of all, we want you to know we're all for you, wherever you're at in that continuum of staying or leaving. And we want to be a resource. But the second thing is, I feel like the thoughts that we've talked about today sort of apply to somebody who might be in that moment. And I think the thought of getting to talk honestly with someone who's not ego involved with the decision would be a really good idea. Another thought that we're talking about is having that perspective that Jimmy talked about just now. Another would be maybe entering into some whole person, whole body surrender, like Dallas Willard talks about in Renovation of the Heart, like literally lay on the ground and every single part of you go through what does it mean to surrender all of you back to God, and let that be your foundation. And then the last thing, according to Dr. Diddams, is make sure you eat breakfast. So all those things, our hearts are with you. We understand the moment that we're in, and we want to support anyone we can as best we know how. But there may be some very big decisions that are being considered by those on this call right now and who may hear this in the future, and we want to support you in that process.
So good. Thank you, Mindy. Jimmy.
Gosh, I love what's been said. Two very smart women here.
Yeah, they're so much smarter than us, if we're honest.
Oh, I know. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, that goes back a long way because I went to school with Margaret. We're actually in the same class at Wheaton College in 19. Anyway.
Join us next week, and we're going to hear a lot more about that.
I sat next to her, and she kind of got me through a lot of classes, so I'm still very grateful for that. So thank you, Margaret. But anyway, we will actually talk lots more about this actually next week. But this is such a critical time because it's just about 6 months that we've just been in the midst of this craziness. And there is this season that you can take and you can say, you know what, my gosh, this is just a crazy time and I've got to work extra hours and we're going to have to just go. And I've got to do everything I can to serve. And so you kind of put like everything on hold in life, your spouse and your kids oftentimes, and I'm just going to serve. That is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And we have found that those times in which you can just go crazy, especially after a big disaster. I mean, like if there's a hurricane, if there's a flood or whatever, the maximum is about 6 months. The maximum is 6 months, and then you will absolutely fry every system in your body. We are right at that point right now. We're right at that point. And so if you've had that mindset of, I've got to just serve everybody else, and if you're like, you know what, I've got to be at the front of the line to serve and the back of the line to be served, the best thing that you can do right now is to care for your soul. You've got to do that. That might mean a long vacation. I mean, long, a week or two maybe, but you know what though? You've got to back away a little bit right now. You've got to take care of your own soul, which you've already heard, I think, from Mindy and Margaret both. You've got to do those things. This is a critical time because this is the time, and I've started to hear it more and more in the past week. There have been just a flood, and it's just like we just knew this would happen. More and more pastors saying, you know what, I'm done. And what's heartbreaking is more and more pastors, not like I'm done with this church, but I'm done, actually with the ministry, and they're walking away from everything. So I'd say this is a critical juncture right here. You've got to take care of your soul. You will make bad decisions if you don't. You will start to push folks away if you don't. Your team will just become fractured. You've got to care for your own soul. It's not selfish, it's wise. But we're at a critical point, critical point. We'll talk a lot more about this next week.
Well, thank you for that. And friends, thank you for just your wisdom, for taking time and just really sharing what God has placed on your hearts here. And Mindy, I think you really hit it on the head. Jimmy, this whole project at Resilient Church Leadership here, resilientchurchleadership.com, is really to be that safe third space for pastors. Not only do we just take a moment here week in and week out to kind of orient ourselves back to look at things of the backstage, but this whole website, this whole project and platform, if you will, really was started out of a belief that we need those safe third spaces in our lives. Pastors need pastors need friends, ministry leaders need community, and we need one another in order to become healthy and whole. So please use this time, use this whole website at resilientchurchleadership.com as that place where you can find the beginnings of some of that resourcing. In fact, if you subscribe to our newsletter, just join join there on our website, you're going to get a weekly email. And part of that email is if you just need 2 free counseling sessions, coaching sessions, just to have a space to run some ideas by someone that doesn't really have skin in the game in your church, that safe kind of third party, non-ego party, as Margaret so eloquently put it, is we're offering that to you. We want to invest in your ministry. We want to invest in your life, your spiritual health and wholeness, because out of that comes healthy leadership and healthy decision making. Our community, our neighborhoods need healthy pastors, need God's people more than ever. So on behalf of all of us here at Resilient Church Leadership, it has been our pleasure to have you part of this conversation. My name is Eddie Copeland. We will see you next week as we continue this conversation all around healthy and whole leadership. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.
Bye, guys.